If there's any GM not to question being relatively inactive in free agency, it's Eagles GM Howie Roseman and company. Do have to mention, as we discussed, their free agent moves, kind of where the roster stands in terms of the draft picks they do have and projecting them beyond 3 or 4 days of free agency. You know, have to mention the one big addition of Seahawks cornerback Tariq Woolen at that spot opposite of Quinyon Mitchell at 1 year, $15 million. Classic Eagles contract there, kind of a prove it for a player who has all the traits, a lot of experience in production, but see how he fits in here with this culture and this team. Thought that was very well done. That was one that wasn't shocking. But the more noticeable moves is who they let walk in terms of this team. Jalen Phillips at that edge spot, who they had brought in and kind of had a full year of health this year that brought the production enough. The Carolina Panthers give him a big-time 4-year, $120 million contract. There's no way the Eagles were going to be trying to match that versus a team of the Panthers trying to get their top-shelf edge rusher. And then you throw that over on a smaller scale to Reed Blankenship, starting safety, exciting whites alongside Cooper DeJean. Heartbreaking to see him leave in that aspect. But to get a great 3-year, $24.75 million deal with the Texans secondary that is the best in football. You take them from a strength to a superpower, potentially adding Blankenship next to Kalen Bullock, adding him with a nickel spot that is my favorite nickel in the league in Jalen Petrie, and then the best corner tandem in the league, in my opinion, in Derek Stingley Jr. and Kamari Lassiter. Just demonic. Then to another level of the defense, Nakobe Dean at linebacker to get a 3-year, $36 million deal with the Raiders. That was one for a former third-round pick they had gotten their mileage out of. Not going to invest heavily in a linebacker spot there, particularly in that tier. That one wasn't surprising. And then rounding it out, as far as Jahan Dotson as their receiver 3 behind that incredible tandem of A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith, he gets an opportunity to go shoot for some more upside and some more target share with the Atlanta Falcons for 2 years, $15 million. Think of that price point. That's the Falcons anticipating him being their receiver 2 alongside Drake London heading into the draft. And that kind of goes to the next 2 aspects of free agency worth noting, in my opinion. Obviously the extension of Mammoth Dancing Bear, Jordan Davis getting the highest paid nose tackle contract in NFL history. Worth it in every bit to me. A cornerstone of that team that they took 13th overall in the past. And then you throw that over some of the rumors we've seen. Been denied, come back up, been denied. So the validity of it is questionable. But the potential shopping of 3-tech Jalen Carter on that defensive line, a Pro Bowl caliber player, former 10th overall pick. TBD, I don't imagine he's going anywhere, but just worth mentioning as we had in some of those discussions along the lines of like a Max Crosby and all of that fiasco. Talk about a conversation for another day. But having said that, mention their current cap standing being $12.6 million. They're always going to have great flexibility. They're always going to have the potential for best player available. They're always going to have draft capital. This is one of the best run organizations in the league for a reason year over year. But throw it over to the draft picks. To be sitting there with a good number at 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 draft picks with that cap space, minimal needs. You're starting it at 23. And it's a little bit odd here to pick it at 23. You've gotten used to them at that bottom couple of spots. This was an interesting one because when I look at the team needs remaining, safety, having lost Blankenship, interior offensive line, and having said that safety spot, they do like what they have in some in that room. They really feel fondly about Andrew Makuba and what he's done, but still includes safety, interior offensive line. They're always going to be rotating and adding cheaper, younger, big men on each side of the ball. Receiver, With the Dotson gone at the receiver 3 spot, is A.J. Brown headed out of town? There were some discussions as far as the New England Patriots. That's a little bit of a projection. Tight end, Dallas Goedert is still out there, so that could change in terms of addressing this team in this context. But covering all 32 in this style here, in terms of my videos, I was ready to touch on the Eagles and something that we can loop back to if something big does happen as far as Goddard. And then lastly, going back to the theme of big men, edge. So having said all that, starting at 23, went with Toledo safety Emmanuel McNeel-Warren. If he makes it this far, is who I believe will be the third safety off the board. The value's too exciting for someone at 6'3 and a half, 201 pounds. Very physical, always in the right place, instinctive football player, rangy, good production. We can't get desensitized to these upper shelf 40 times we're seeing year over year at the NFL Combine. To run a 4.52 at 6'3 and a half, 201, and play with that much physicality, to throw him into that Eagles brand on the back end, having added Tariq Woolen next to a Quinyon Mitchell, having Mukuba and Cooper DeJean as one of the elite nickels in this league, that's shoring up a unit in this opportunity heading into day 2, where I think there's some better value at the other positions in terms of tier drop-offs. Number 54, one of the ultimate winners of the Combine. I highlighted in my Combine preview that I thought this guy would win as far as the defensive interior, and that's Oklahoma defensive tackle Grayson Halton. 6'2 and a half, 293, all kinds of athleticism and pass rush upside. A 9.7 relative athletic score in Indianapolis, a 97th percentile athlete. Running a 4.83 at that size, though he won't be running 40 yards downfield. It's testing, matching tape, matching production as far as the traits and intangibles, the burst, the explosiveness as a pass rusher. 36.5 inch vert at 99.5 percentile for the position is an even greater testament to that. I mean, that's fucking absurd at that size. A 9'6 broad as well. Just an explosive lower half athlete at that size. 8.5 sacks the last 2 seasons worth of production from the interior. Second in pressures among SEC defensive tackles this year at 30. And when you look at it, you see that ability to get skinny between gaps. You see that collection of pass rush moves, whether it be a swim move, a chop, a spin, just generally getting across the blocker's face, making it tougher for him. Had a Kobe Turner comp for Halton, Los Angeles Ram there. At 54, this is an immediate contributor and somebody that kind of fits the brand of the Eagles leading into that third-round pick that they have. They have 2. Leading into it at 68. And at 68, in my opinion, one of the most underrated players in this draft for what is a very voluminous receiver class with the depth. Clemson wide receiver Antonio Williams. I mean, let's, for this conversation purpose, assume you've got A.J. Brown staying in the building, and I would project he is if he's still here at this point. To have a receiver 3 go from what you had in Dotson to then bringing in Williams, I mean, to have run a 4.41, a 39.5 inch vert for a 21-year-old who declared early, so technical in his route running, very sharp, crisp routes, very reliable hands, 1.8% drop rate. That is an insanely good number for the reliability across 34 starts of a sample size. 14 missed tackles in 2024, another testament to his ability in space, his footwork that you see in his route running. Has experience playing slot, playing outside. At that receiver 3 role, I would imagine hear him get more slot snaps with his profile. That value was too good, particularly stacking on the 2 picks that you already had up to this point. And at 98, again, we mentioned with Goddard, this is a little bit of a projection at this point. So if Goddard is to stay in town, which I don't imagine, I think he does move in free agency. This would change to a next video addressing the Eagles, but having it here, Stanford tight end Sam Roush, for all the talk of the combine of Kenyon Sadiq, and justly so, 43.5-inch vert, breaking the tight end 40-yard dash record at a 4.39 at 239 pounds, an electric first-round playmaker. For all the discussion about an Eli Stowers out of Vanderbilt, setting a combine record at 45.5 in the vertical, just an explosive former quarterback who transferred to Vanderbilt, became a tight end, such a high-end athlete. Roush came out the best of all of them in terms of his relative athletic score, a 9.99, nearly 100 percentile athlete at 6'6", 267. For all the talks we have, position, but particularly at this tight end spot of, this guy's a little thinner, he's not much of a blocker, he's more of a modern motion tight end. This is the classic body build that we grew up on in the NFL 10, 20 years ago. 6'6", 267, very strong, 25 bench reps, but the explosiveness at 38.5-inch vert, 10.6 broad in his lower body, 4.7 speed in open space and straight line. Shorter arms, that'd be the only knock you could put here, but his blocking technique and production makes up for that. Elite in that category. At pick 98, in a good tight end class, in my opinion, particularly in this range of tier, that's before you reach a drop-off and like that spot heading into day 3. In what Howie Roseman addresses the room is saying, we're looking at guys that probably aren't starters now but can become starters, and they've proven that. At pick 122, Auburn edge Kieran Crawford, 6'4", 253, former Arkansas State transfer, very twitched up, and adds that with a deadly hand swipe. I mean, strong, powerful hands, combating blockers. To be 4th in the SEC in pressures on the quarterback at 43 this year, the production translated from the traits and the testing to the tape and thereon. Like that is somebody you throw into a rotation who can turn into a starter with potentially his best football ahead of him for the Eagles. At 137, this is a direct reflection of the Nakobe Dean move at linebacker. For Texas A&M linebacker Taurine York to get mentioned as the 5'10", 227-pounder, smaller stature, kind of somebody that's always had to prove it. He's so smart, similar to Dean. 39 starts at A&M. He's only 20 years old. Beyond his years, instinctively. Third team All-SEC this past season, all freshman SEC as well earlier in his career. His lack of length can be seen in terms of taking on blocking linemen, but a really strong pound-for-pound ability to stack and shed, explodes through gaps, the reactions of blockers. He buys himself that extra half step with his instincts, and he's got great spatial awareness, ability to click and close in coverage. At this spot, even cheaper than you took Dean as a third-rounder years ago. I think that's a good match to have a similar kind of archetype to come into a room that's proven it can handle it. And then lastly, rounding it out with a big man on the offensive line, another Auburn Tiger in Jeremiah Wright. One of the coolest factoids I saw come out of combine interviews was his explanation of his current training and past training with former Auburn and Bengals legend Willie Anderson. Very, very similar in size. Willie 6'5", 340, Wright 6'5", 331 at the combine, 33 and an 1/8-inch arms, 10-inch hands. This is a large human being with a lot of versatility. I think that's someone that can develop into a starter for them. The need is not right now, but as a depth piece, so much upside for a former SEC contributor coming out of that Auburn program. So kind of in summary, looking at those needs we talked about, a safety, interior offensive line, receiver, tight end, edge. You touched on every single one of them at good value, coming off of being delicate with your $12.4 million in cap you have remaining, having just paid Jordan Davis, having brought in Tariq Woolen, moving on from some guys that were more value additions for you in the past. Jahan Dotson was a trade from the Commanders. Jalen Phillips was not originally drafted by this team. Reed Blankenship is a former 5th-round pick. Kobe Dean is a 3rd-round pick. This is what they do. This entire layout we just did sticks to the historical theme and practices of GM Howie Roseman and now what we're seeing in head coach Nick Sirianni. That even if there are to be a move along the lines of a Dallas Goedert and what happens there in the coming days, there's not going to be that much change in terms of what we looked at here for one of the best run teams in the league in the Philadelphia Eagles.